mode.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this green validation webinar, Automating the Validation Process. My name is Josh Richards. I'm the Marketing Director at Merit Solutions, and I know Valarie King-Bailey is here joining us. She's the CEO of OnShore Technology Group, and I know Valarie has a lot that she wants to cover today. So without wasting any more of your time, I would like to go ahead and kick it off and let Valarie lead us from here. Valarie, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Josh, and good morning or good afternoon to you wherever you are in the country. My name is Valarie King-Bailey. I'm the CEO of OnShore Technology Group, and I'm going to be kicking off today the first in an executive webinar series, and today we're going to be talking about green validation. It's a term that I use to talk about what we call paperless validation processes. I've been doing validation for a number of years, about 30 years, and over the years there has been a need, or I would say a desire on most of the validation engineers' part to want to really automate the process, to streamline it. And so today we're going to actually talk about that. Before we get started, I want to go through a couple of housekeeping items that would help make the presentation beneficial for all participants. Number one, please don't put your phone on hold during the webcast. I know Josh is probably going to mute everybody, but sometimes if you put it on your phone on hold, there's music on hold and it would kind of disrupt things. Also, there's a Q&A button that you should see to submit questions. We will have a Q&A at the end of the process, so you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. And if you need any technical assistance, I think you can dial 00 to get technical assistance. And then finally, this webcast will be recorded, and the audio presentation will be posted on Merit Solutions' website in their events section. So if you or any of your colleagues would like to review this at another time, this will be recorded today. I'd also like to thank our host, Merit Solutions, for hosting this executive series, and I would encourage you to go on Merit's website and not only take a look at what they offer, but sign up for the other webinar series. This is one in a series of presentations that Merit and OnShore are going to be given. So in addition to me, there'll be other outstanding presenters that will be presenting as well as myself. So I won't be doing all of them, but you should go on Merit Solutions' website and just check that out. To give you a little bit of my background, I founded OnShore Technology Group 11 years ago. We just celebrated last week, as a matter of fact, our 11th anniversary. I've got over 30 years of validation experience throughout the different engagements or career opportunities that I've had. I am the author of the FDA Validation Toolkit for Microsoft Dynamics AX. We just released the 4th version of the FDA Validation Toolkit, and it includes some new features, and some of which we're going to talk about today. I also work for Cmmi as Chief Marketing Officer, Documentum, and I was Director of Document Management and Quality Systems for Abbott Laboratories. So I've actually been on the vendor side as well as the practical, hands-on validation management side of the house. Just a little bit about OnShore really quickly. We're an independent validation and verification firm. We were founded in 2004, and we're headquartered in Chicago. And we basically do validation and verification for the life sciences industry, and we also serve the government industry as well. We did release a new version of our software solution called Validation Master, and we'll be talking about that a little bit today as well. So, without further ado, today's topics are going to cover paperless validation strategies, and really what I'm going to talk about are some of the challenges that you have when you're conducting validation exercises in a manual environment, and talk about how you can apply those in an electronic or automated environment. I'll then go through what I affectionately call my 7 habits of effective paperless validation projects, and then I'll give you some final thoughts and takeaways and things that you can start doing tomorrow to reach validation maturity. So let's talk about paperless validation and what is it, just to establish some common ground among ourselves. I always like to start with this because this is the heart of the problem. The worldwide cost of software failure is $6.2 trillion annually. I actually looked this number up, and I was stunned that some of the researchers are saying that the cost of software failure is high. In the life sciences industry particularly, when you look at software failures, that's really kind of the essence of why we validate systems. We look at software failures, defects, cosmetic defects, major defects, critical defects. We look at all of these kinds of issues that could affect the usability or the intended use of the system, and these have to be addressed during validation. So as you're looking at this, please note that the problem actually is huge. Now, couple this with the fact that a lot of applications like AX, for example, are delivered in the cloud. If you were to talk to me about 10 years ago, very few, if any, AX systems were delivered in the cloud. So when you throw cloud computing in, and then you throw in the fact that today, unlike 10 years ago, many people are using devices such as tablets to conduct some of their business. So the cost of software failure is increasing. So when you look at the cost of software quality, it really relies on testing as the core essential component to manage quality. Now, there are other quality dimensions as well, but quality really relies on testing from a validation perspective to ensure quality. Typically, and this is just a round number, system integrators spend about 50% almost of their schedule in test. Either they're doing unit testing, or they're doing operational qualification testing, installation qualification testing, performance qualification testing, and then when you throw in user testing, there's a lot of testing that goes on, and typically in an AX project, those testing areas are very typical. A lot of people devote more than half the resources to fixing defects. And sometimes as you're implementing software, a lot of what you're looking at is defects. Now, defects tend to be a little bit more when you're dealing with bespoke development or custom development as opposed to commercial off-the-shelf software. There's no really rhyme or reason to it because there could be buggy commercial off-the-shelf software too as well. But you have to manage the quality of the software, and to do that, you have to really manage the cost and the schedule. I assume that many of your bosses would not like for you to focus on, getting a perfect quality solution without considering the cost and the schedule. Cost is really a central factor in all of this. But to get a quality product out of the test environment, you really have to put a quality product into the test environment itself. And we're going to talk about how to do that. This is a general diagram of the way the AX validation process flows. And typically, you may be familiar with the so-called V model of software validation, where we have planning activities on one side and then test activities on the other side, and development in between. Usually what we do is, because of the fact that it's a commercial off-the-shelf software, there's a risk assessment, and then there's also a supplier assessment that's conducted. And then you define your user requirements. Very important point. Without user requirements, you really can't validate a system. Validation really depends on having a good set of user requirements that define intended use. The definition of validation from the FDA's perspective is confirmation and documented evidence that a system conforms to its intended use. So the intended use principle is really key. in validation. So how do we prove intended use? We document a set of user requirements, which not only include operational requirements, but they also include performance requirements and security requirements. A lot of people leave off kind of security requirements as somewhat of an afterthought, I find. And security requirements, especially in this area of cybersecurity that we're living in, it's very important that security be considered. And then you draft a validation master plan, which is your overall strategy document, and then your validation test plan, the test execution strategy where you execute all of your test scripts, including user acceptance testing, and then you do defect tracking. Usually during validation testing, you have incidents or defects which may occur during testing. If the FDA says if you conduct testing properly, you should find defects in the process. One of the big challenges when you're doing a validation exercise in AX or in any system for that matter is you want to make sure that the defects are actually tied to the test scripts. And these tend to be somewhat disjointed processes. And then once you track all your defects and summarize those, you generate your summary report, traceability matrices, and so forth. Underlying your validation process are a set of standard operating procedures that provide governance for the entire process, and also a validation change control process that allows you to change the validation process and deliverables as you go along. The thing that you need to understand about AX validation is it's a living thing. Validation is not a one-time event. Validation is something that happens over a period of time. So if you look at this process in its simplistic view, this is kind of a simplistic overall view of the way validation is carried out and conducted. Now, one of the things you'll notice in my chevrons is that they are somewhat disjointed. They go into a logical flow, but they're disjointed. What we want to talk about today is how we can blend this into a seamless process for software validation to make it easier for you to generate the deliverables and provide the due diligence that you need for the FDA, but blend this together in a more cohesive way. So what you should know is that the lack of software quality is pretty costly. Validation is looked at as somewhat of a legal best practice. So not only does life sciences require validation, but in my previous life as an engineer, I work with NASA, who does validation for all of their systems. As a matter of fact, NASA has a validation headquarters where they do nothing but validation for not only NASA systems, but government systems across the U.S. Federal government. They recognize, too, that software quality is costly. So there are many other industries that do this as well. Paperless or green validation can help you save time and money, and that's what we're going to talk about. And software quality can be improved if you use these green validation principles. One of the things that we're also going to talk about is that the FDA is now embracing mobility. In the olden days, about 30 years ago, everything was done actually on desktops, or, you know, not even 30 years ago, but 20 years ago when the PC came to being, everything was done on the desktop. Now people are using mobile technology like tablets to do a lot of stuff, and I want to talk to you about that. And we'll talk a little bit about validation process maturity. So let's look at some of the paperless validation strategies that we have. Before we talk about that, let's talk about the problem with paper. One of the things, when I worked for Abbott Laboratories, we did a $16 million validation project there. And one of the things I thought as I was going through this is that we're generating a heck of a lot of paper. In 1975, there was the first prediction of the paperless office. There was a Time magazine article, which if you want to see this, I could share this with you. They talked about the paperless office. And this vision has been somewhat not realized because even though today in 2015 we have, you know, all kinds of ways to not generate paper, believe it or not, most life sciences companies still do look at paper. 90% of all business records are still paper-based. 80% are never looked at it again. And 80% of information is still retained on paper, according to Cap Venture. 7.5% of documents get lost, and 3% get misfiled. And the statistic that I found startling is that professionals spend up to about 50% of their time searching for paper still. And this problem hasn't really gone away. So paperless validation, or green validation, is a unified electronic process leveraging advanced technology, and I'm going to share some advanced technology with you today, to fulfill the technical and business requirement for software validation in eliminating the use of paper-based manual processes. And one of the things I want to note about green validation is it doesn't mean that you can't use paper. It's the minimization of the paper that we're trying to get at. Eventually, with more paper-based processes, you can achieve more efficiency and reduced costs. Let me give you an example. I was working with a client recently, and one of the challenges that they said that they had in their validation process was that their cycle times were up to about 80 days. And that's how long it took them to get documents signed. And this is a very large organization, roughly about 25,000 people. And this organization was having difficulty with cycle times because of the number of signatures they had. When they switched to a green validation process, they reduced cycle times over 85% in just electronically signing things. They would have people printing documents. They had a whole document area that had 12 people, full-time equivalents, that did nothing but manage the documentation and input this back into a portal. And the sad thing is that they were using a content management system to go back and store the documents after they were signed on paper. So there was this onerous paper scanning process, which was really inefficient for them. They reduced their headcount by 12 full-time equivalents. They didn't actually get rid of the people, but they repurposed them for different things. So this can actually save money at the end of the day. People are your most important assets, so what you want to do is have them focus on more value-added functions, and that's what my client did. They repurposed these 12 people and had them go into a different area. We talk about lean validation processes now, and one of the things I'm going to show you as a part of the validation process is how you can use lean technology. And I don't know if you're familiar with lean manufacturing, but lean technologies are really kind of just-in-time technologies that allow you to basically not only manage the validation document deliverables, but manage the process as you're going along. It's a different project management methodology for software validation. And then we want to ensure quality and compliance by design. So any system that's paperless should have processes built in, such as 21 CFR Part 11, such as change control, incident management, requirements management, and so forth. The system should work the way you work. That's really what it is. And then ultimately, we want to be environment friendly. So some of the challenges, and you may recognize some of those if you've been doing validation for any period of time, document cycle times are probably the most challenging when you deal with paper because of the need for having to print the paper, sign it, and perhaps scan it back in. Some people don't do the whole scanning back into the process, but the inability to electronically review and sign documents is huge. I was working on a validation project with a client who did not support 21 CFR Part 11 electronic signatures. And one of the things that we had to do with the hybrid process is to go through the actual recording the documents in an electronic format, printing the documents out, signing each and every page of the document. That process probably took us as long as it took to execute the scripts. This could be huge. Another problem or challenge with paper-based validation is requirements management and traceability. Specifically in the AX environment, you could have a lot of requirements. I've had AX implementations where I've had very few requirements, and I've had large implementations where there were many requirements, functional requirements, design requirements, and user requirements. Your paper-based system needs to be able to deal with all of these. And sometimes this is difficult because to actually trace the requirements is the problem with requirements management. Validation testing as well. Being able to trace requirements to each of the validation tests. Sometimes if you have a few requirements, this is not a big deal. If you have a lot of requirements, this could be a big deal. And then incident management. You are required by regulation to trace incidents to each of the tests and determine root cause of the incident and close out the incident. That closed loop process gets more people in trouble as they're trying to go through this than anything. And then document management. The main deliverable from a validation process is document management. But notice I put document and records management there. Records management and document management have some overlaps, but records management is the indexing, classification, long-term archival, and storage of that information. Remember, validation is a process that happens over time. So you need to effectively manage those records, and these are records which must be legally defensible. So as you sign electronic records, understand that those signatures are the legally binding equivalent of your handwritten signature. So you have to manage those as if you were effectively managing legal documents. So there's a document management part, and then there's a records management part. And then the project management, managing the whole project from start to finish. In my line of business, I am required by my clients to keep my project moving and keep it on time and within budget. You and your organization are probably the same way. But what is the best way of doing this? And I spoke earlier about lean validation, project management principles. We'll talk about that a little bit shortly. And then validation intelligence. One of the biggest questions that I get asked on a daily basis is how are we doing with the project? How are we doing with our requirements? How are we doing with our test preparation? How are we doing with this aspect, that aspect, or the other aspect? Are we closing our incidents? And so forth. You need real-time validation intelligence to really effectively do this. All of this is difficult on paper. And this is what we're going to talk about in terms of green validation. How do we get this information and be able to do this in a timely way? Now, one of the things that you probably are aware of, and you may have one of these, we live in a bring your own device world. So as we go from a system-centric mainframe 30 years ago to where we had mainframes in many computers, to client-server, to web, to devices, it's more user-centric now. So a lot of organizations are starting to leverage tablet computers as opposed to their desktops. Like this morning, for example, when I got up, I started reading my email on my tablet. I have a Microsoft Surface, and I started reading my email on my tablet. I also have an iPad, and sometimes in the evening, I read my mail on my iPad. So the bring your own device is creating a radically different kind of user. This does affect validation. So BYOD is changing really the way we work. So people use smartphones, they use tablets and other devices, but if you look at the statistics, company applications are now starting to move to the device world as well. How does all of this impact validation? Because devices really are here to stay. So
hey Valarie, can I interrupt you really quick? I don't mind it, or don't want to interrupt, but we do have one question, and I thought I'd go ahead and ask you now.
Sure, go ahead.
Would that be all right? All right, we have Carol who wants to know if what you're presenting is designed for AX only.
It's AX or any validation project, but I'm going to mostly be talking about AX. But it can be any validation project. These principles do apply.
So she wants to know if it's a service offering as well.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Carol, if you have more questions and you want me to just unmute you, I can do that as well.
Okay. So as we look at change with respect to how change is occurring, the changes that are coming right now, and if you look at mobility and the cloud, these are two big changes that are happening not only with AX, but they're happening with applications all over. So whether you use AX or whether you use some other application, and we validate all kinds of applications, so not just AX, but cloud and mobility are really changing the game with respect to validation. Now, this is interesting. You can go on the FDA's website and pull down this guidance. The FDA has new guidance on mobile applications. A lot of the applications have to do not only with mobile applications that are used from an IT perspective, like for enterprise technologies, but this is mobile medical applications as well. So as organizations, or as doctors, if you will, are starting to use mobile medical applications in their workplace to do things, these applications now have to have certain controls over them. It was interesting because the last time I went to the doctor, my doctor came in with a tablet, and my blood pressure and vitals were taken, and this information was fed directly into his tablet, which I thought was really kind of interesting because of the HIPAA regulations and things of that sort. So it was a little scary. And when I checked into the hospital, you know how you actually have the little tablet where they have you fill out, you know, what are you allergic to and all of that. That was also a medical device application. And there were all kinds of security requirements around that, saying that this information cannot be transmitted and it won't be distributed, et cetera, et cetera. But I just found it interesting that a lot of those applications are there. So when we talk about all of this and going to green validation, what are we really talking about at the end of the day? Well, this is a validation testing maturity model, or a validation process. It's not only for testing, but it's for the process as well. So if you're familiar with lean validation principles, you'll look at this Cmmi testing maturity model, or the Cmmi maturity model. This kind of follows the same maturity model except for validation. So you start out at the initial stage where processes are chaotic and undefined, and then you start to get from level 1 to level 2, which is a more managed process. So most organizations start really at the level 1. And then they move to a level 2 where you establish a program-wide strategy, a test plan, and this is where you start to provide governance for your whole validation process. And then you move to a more defined process improvement where you bring in institutional best practices and accepted best practices, and then you start to measure your performance. Now, when you get to level 5 or level 4, most organizations that I work with don't have any metrics around validation. How do I manage and track how many issues are being opened and closed? How do I measure and track how long it's taking to do validation testing, and so forth? And there are many metrics, and we're going to talk about some of them. I'm going to show you some examples shortly of how you can get to level 4. Level 5 is really where you want to be. You have process optimization, you have built-in quality control, and you have deficiencies and defect prevention that allow you to be proactive as opposed to reactive. And you'll notice that level 5 optimization here in the red box below, this level 5 optimization has defect prevention, test process optimization, and quality control built in. When you're dealing with COTS, I like to look at an application maturity level. So it starts from a basic, how are applications made ready for deployment, all the way through, are we ready for change? So this is kind of a variation on the same theme of the validation maturity model. Now, when we talk about a paperless validation process for AX, one of the things you should know, and automated validation testing can be used for any application. I'm talking about AX today, using this system as just an example, but automated validation testing is really here. So if you think back to when validation was established about 40 years ago with some of the first microcomputers, if you will, that came out, validation processes were purely manual. They were on paper. As we go through the process, when you deal with more expert systems, and when you're dealing with systems that have maybe perhaps a lot of requirements or a lot of testing, you need to have a way to deal with the automated process to get you to that level 5 maturity. The application that you're seeing here is called Validation Master. And one of the first things that Validation Master has is actionable validation intelligence. Remember I said when you move to a level 5, you have a way to actually measure, track, and manage your processes. Through here, I can manage my requirements, and I know exactly my requirements coverage. How many test scripts have requirements, how many test scripts do not have requirements, and where I am with respect to my pass-fail, where I am with respect to my team activities, where I am with respect to defects. I should have the ability to see this. The beauty of this application is I can look at this on a tablet. So we're using this in my practice now, and one of the things that we do is I could look at any of my validation projects on a tablet, and I could tell exactly the status of that project, where it is, how many defects do I have open, how many are opening and closing, and I have even statistics on velocity as well. Lean validation principles are built in, and we'll talk about that. Remember I said earlier in the presentation that you can't really validate a system unless you have the ability to manage requirements. User requirements are essential for validation. So any tool that helps you to manage validation allows you to do this in a green manner. I can actually establish my requirements. I have workflows that are set up that I can put all of my requirements or a given requirement into a workflow. So essentially, you know, sometimes people don't want to manage their requirements requirement by requirement, but if you deal with larger organizations like we do, sometimes requirements come from different lines of business and different people. It's very hard to track on paper how to manage those requirements. This requirements management tool actually allows you to manage the requirements, version the requirements, which is really important. I have a client that I'm working with right now that's on version 16 of one requirement, because this requirement keeps changing because of changing priorities in the line of business. On paper, what we would normally do is go into a draft document and we would just change the requirement. But sometimes it is helpful to understand the history of how that requirement changed. This requirements manager has a change control feature and an audit trail. So now anytime a requirement is changed, I can tell who changed it, when the requirement changed, what version it is, and because validation is a living thing, I could tell what version of the software the requirement was actually traced to, and whether or not this is a functional requirement, a design requirement, or a operational requirement, or a security requirement. I can categorize requirements that way. I can also right-click and change the requirement and automatically create a test script for that particular requirement. So now my traceability happens automatically within the system. When you do test automation without paper, the test automation really tracks the coverage of the test across all the browsers, devices, and environments, and it allows you to really automate the validation process. So this tool not only allows you to set up your test, but I could set up a test farm, and I can actually have it run automated tests at 12 o'clock tonight if I wanted to. So that's how automated the process is. I can also do testing in a semi-automatic way where I'm actually clicking through the test and actually approving the test as well. But you should have a holistic view of the test. So remember I said I could right-click on that requirement and automatically create a test script. From any of my requirements, I can just simply right-click. So the menu that you see pulled down there allows me to create a test script from a requirement. I can automatically trace all of my requirements, so no more manual tracing. One of the things that happens in the paper-based world is traceability happens in a very manual fashion. So I have to go through all of my test cases and figure out which requirements go with which. Sometimes when you have multiple requirements associated with a single test script, this can sometimes be challenging or error-prone. And that's really what you don't want to do in that. So the system helps you to ensure compliance and ensure that your test scripts are associated with the validation documents. So you have a way of identifying and capturing issues. So when you execute your test cases, you get your results, you define what the incidents are. So literally, in the system, it allows you to raise an incident report in the middle of a test. So let's say you hit a bug. You can immediately raise an incident report. That incident report is directly linked to the test script and allows you to actually do a closed loop process for identifying and capturing issues and or events when software detects a failure. Now I can actually track and get the metrics that I need. So the automatic capturing of incidents actually logs an incident when a test fails. So as soon as you hit a failure, an incident log box pops up and allows you to record that incident. From the incidents menu, you can drill down from requirements to test an incident and actually create them from there. You get real-time incident status, and I can actually look at the metrics. This is the level 5 validation maturity that I was talking about when it comes to incidents. I can actually categorize all my incidents, trace them directly back to a test case, and then I can customize fields. So if you have specific fields within your user environment that you want, this is completely flexible. So you don't have to use the fields that come with the system. Now, validation has gone mobile. Remember I was telling you I can actually execute tests online from a mobile phone, from a Surface, or from a Apple computer or Apple iPad. We can do this all without paper now. And because of the fact that you have editing capability on tablet computers, it makes it a lot easier. Lately, I've been doing, I'm on a Surface computer now doing this presentation. I've been doing a lot of my validation on my Surface computer because of the fact that I actually have a pen on my Surface tablet. I can actually sign documents electronically directly online without having to go to paper. I can do forwards and backwards automated requirements traceability. So the system automatically gives you forward traceability, tracing the requirements to the test scripts and tracing the test scripts to the requirements. That's forward and backwards traceability. You have the ability to generate any of the custom reports that you want and then look at any of your use case capabilities. Now, I'm talking about OQ testing, but this could also be used for PQ testing, user acceptance testing, unit testing, any kind of testing that you may want to do. Content really in a validation environment is king. So any good paperless-based system needs to have the ability to allow you to manage validation content. So you can manage all of your document deliverables, and we're using a 21 CFR Part 11 compliant version of SharePoint. And SharePoint itself is validated, and this entire system comes with a set of validation test scripts and document deliverables to allow you to validate the system yourself. The FDA requires that if you use commercial off-the-shelf system for validation, that system has to be validated in and of itself. We do have test scripts for all of the validation or the entire system that we're presenting here. But it has built-in 21 CFR Part 11 to allow you to sign documents directly from the portal. You can actually sign documents and get them signed. And here's an example of the electronic signature signing process that makes this a lot easier for you to do online. And then it has an audit trail that presents the status of your electronic signatures online. So what you should know is that automation really should work the way you work. One of the ways that I gauge the usability of a system is that the system works the way I work and doesn't force me into using a process that is not comfortable for me or that fits into my organization. It should have compliance built in. So if you're mapping to methodologies such as GAMP5, 21 CFR Part 11 regulations, or GMP regulations, a lot of that compliance should be built in. This includes a built-in change control feature that works just like change control in a GMP environment. It includes electronic signatures that are compliant with Part 11. It includes built-in GAMP5 compliance. So the testing, the automated testing component of this allows you to capture electronic test scripts automatically. So essentially, if you will, if you go into AX or any other application, you're able to hit a record button and the system actually captures all of your screenshots and everything and allows you to export that, and it goes directly into your SharePoint portal. This works the way you work. So that's really what organizations are doing. You should also know that the FDA is embracing the BYOD, or bring your own device trend. So you can look online and you'll see that the FDA has a mobility forum that they have established, where a lot of industry thinkers as well as the agency are starting to look at how they're going to regulate this. So it may look kind of hokey to you that organizations, we're talking about conducting or executing validation test scripts online, but this is going to become the reality because more and more organizations, life sciences companies particularly, are embracing devices in their organization. What you need to have is governance around those, but this is really changing the game. It's all about process efficiency and cost savings at the end of the day. The electronic workflows help you to eliminate costly processes, and e-signatures can save time and money. I've been working with Part 11 since Part 11 became an official regulation, and a lot of organizations that have adopted Part 11 in whatever system they're using, whether it's a content management system, a document management, quality management, Microsoft Dynamics, AX, NAV, whatever, electronic signatures are just an easy-to-use best practice that would save time and money. So a unified enterprise validation management system really facilitates green validation. Now, after having borrowed the title of 7 habits, here's some 7 habits for effective green validation projects. Number 1, I always tell clients, establish good governance first. If you really want to get to level 5 maturity, remember level 5 maturity is based on controlled processes. So you want to have an effective set of standard operating procedures that provide governance for the entire validation process. You want to, number 2, electronically route your validation documents. So a lot of organizations consider electronic routing, so to speak, as sending it through email. That's really not, electronic routing. And I'm being facetious because they don't actually do that. But sometimes email kind of substitutes for electronic routing. You want to have the ability to be able to effectively manage and capture signatures and get time and date stamps on documents. This is very important. You also want to use electronic signatures to really get to that level 5 maturity. This really optimizes the process. And remember, level 5 is all about optimization. So optimally, what do? Capture signatures on paper or capture them electronically? Electronic signatures are key. You really want to adopt test automation. And so the test automation piece of this allows you to capture and record scripts. So now, to give you an example, I can actually capture my test scripts in a matter of minutes, and I have the ability to play them back, if you will, if I want to see what the test script is actually doing. This facilitates review and editing. Again, automation of the test process gets you to that level 5 optimization. The main deliverables out of the validation process are documents. That's what we're doing. Remember, validation by definition of the FDA is providing documented evidence that a system conforms to its intended use. In order to do that, if documents are the deliverables, you must have some sort of content management system at the core of this. So leverage ECM, and whether it be SharePoint or whether it be another system, content management should be at the core of your strategy. You also need to define records management policies. Remember, records management is the indexing, classification, long-term archival, and storage of information. You want to make sure that your records are legally defensible. So how do you manage the audit trail, for example? A lot of systems, AX included, have an audit trail capability in it, but not a lot of people have thought about how to effectively manage that over time. Remember, the audit trail, one of its characteristics is that it must be independent. If you're going to independently manage the audit trail, that means that you shouldn't go have the ability to go back and change it or refresh it or delete it or anything like that. But from a records management perspective, how do we archive that? Because audit trails over time can get huge. They can result in terabytes of information. How do you establish effective policies to manage that? How do you manage your documents? 15 years later, will I be able to find the validation documentation for project XYZ? Records management policies are essential to get to level 5. And then you want to aim as your goal level 5 validation maturity. So you want to look at your processes today and determine what level you're at and strive for level 5 validation maturity to embrace the areas that we're talking about. You also can save time and money by going green. I've talked about this throughout the presentation, and this actually allows you to reduce the amount of time that it takes. Traceability is a derivative from the process. The ability to link test scripts and requirements is a derivative of the process, and so forth. So rather than doing all of these types of things that are essential to validation manually, you want to make sure that all of these things are done in an automated way, and paperless validation can help you reduce the time and the cost savings. So let me leave you with a few final thoughts on paperless validation strategies. You should really seek level 5 validation maturity in what you're doing. One of the things that you want to do is to define your requirements for validation first. But to do that, you need to have a good process for effectively managing requirements. The way I did it back in the olden days is I would open up a Microsoft Word document with a table in it of some sort or an Excel spreadsheet, and I would start typing user requirements. That's the old way of doing it. That process still works. But it's not level 5 maturity. Level 5 maturity is really having the ability to manage effectively your requirements, to be able to track and manage and control the process by which requirements are generated, the ability to determine who created the requirement and when, and are these requirements approved, and more importantly, as you revalidate the system over time, to be able to track and manage requirements and tie them to each of the validation projects. So I should be able to see all of the validation requirements for the initial validation exercise, and then 3 validation exercises later, there should be a set of requirements that are there. Managing these through paper-based processes in Microsoft Word is really inefficient. Level 5 says we go further. Establishing good SOPs for validation governance. In our SOP validation, in our validation portal that I showed you, all of your SOPs are tracked and managed and controlled in the portal. So all validation documentation is in one place. You want to establish a consistent methodology for validation. This gets to your process optimization at level 5. You want to be able to get a consistent methodology. So whether you're using GAP5 or a lean validation methodology or some other validation methodology, you really want to establish a consistent methodology and have processes and procedures that govern that. You also want to use automated testing. This is probably the biggest time saving. When I do a validation exercise, about 60% of that process is on the automated or validation testing phase. Automated testing tools just really save time and money. Give you an example, we did a project recently. We had 356 test scripts. we were able to execute those in 4 days, as opposed to 3 weeks that we originally quoted for manual execution of this. This really does save time and money, and if you're interested, I have further metrics that I can talk about with respect to that. What you should start doing tomorrow is determining your application readiness and your level of validation testing maturity. How ready is your application itself, and what level of validation testing maturity are you at, and what are the things that you need to do to get to level 5? And finally, you should know that bringing your own device is really changing the way we work. If you don't think that this is going to impact validation, think again. Even the FDA is recognizing this new reality. You could go on the website and you could look at the FDA's new consortium to look at what they're doing and some of the things that they're thinking about. This isn't something that's off limits for the FDA, and it's something that as you grow and mature, the FDA is going to release new guidance on this. The cost of software quality is huge, $6 trillion worldwide for software quality. Every single organization should be seeking to minimize cost and maximize efficiency and compliance. Green validation is really the answer to a lot of the problems that we have. They support global regulation, and they help to reduce the inefficiencies that are inherent in paper validation. If you're talking to me right now, you probably have one or more applications that are running in the cloud. The cloud really changes things, and in a subsequent webinar, we're going to be talking about cloud validation and what are some of the challenges there, and we're going to go deeper dive into the automated testing. But automated validation testing is here, and you should embrace it if you want to achieve level 5 security and validation processes. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. And Josh, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I think we have some questions.
Yep, we do have a couple questions, and then if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A section. I'll make sure we ask those as well. And so the first one that we have is, can the system support fully automated batch testing?
Yes, great question. One of the things that we typically do as validation engineers is we typically generate a set of test scripts, and then we click through the application software and we actually execute those test scripts. This is in the manual world. You can actually do this in the automated world as well. But there are some times when you have batches of test scripts. Let me give you an example. Recently I was working with a client who had about 600 unit test scripts. They were developing an extension add-on to Microsoft Dynamics AX. And these were just kind of feature function tests. They wanted to run them in kind of an automated environment. So what they did is they used Validation Master to record those. We set up a server farm, and one farm was running Internet Explorer. The other one was Firefox, and I believe the other one was Chrome. At midnight, when all of the load was off the system, if you will, they ran each of these test scripts in a batch mode fashion. This worked brilliantly for them because these test scripts were small, and they got a sense for when you put a load on the system, because they were actually kind of doing some performance testing as well. They got a chance to see how the tests would perform in a simulated environment with a live load on it. So yes, you can do batch testing.
Okay, another good question. What are some of the differences when validating in a cloud or SaaS environment?
That's an excellent question. And again, I would invite you to join Merit Solutions' Best Practice webinar series, because we have one on cloud. When you're working on-premise and you're working on cloud, there are two different aspects that you have to consider. And it all boils down to who's in control. In an on-premise environment, you are in control. So you have to establish procedures and governance for all of the processes that happen on your hardware infrastructure. In a hosted environment, you are not in control directly. The host provider is. So now you have to consider in your validation documentation to qualify that supplier a little bit further. You also have to look at how you test. So in some cases, some organizations say, because I'm in a hosted environment, I'm not going to go through a step-by-step test script for installing Windows and then installing SQL Server and then installing Microsoft Dynamics AX. They will let the host provider establish the infrastructure, and then they will qualify that infrastructure. So in a on-premise environment, you would do that step-by-step installation qualification. So most of the changes happen on the installation qualification side. From a security perspective, you need to do a bit more due diligence to look at your host supplier's service level agreement, and then their disaster recovery strategy. Every validation exercise should have a disaster recovery plan and strategy that effectively manages the system in the case of a disaster. This is different from backup and recovery, because backup and recovery is daily and routine. Disaster recovery is if Hurricane Katrina hits your town and you lose the host system. What do you do, and how do you do this? So there are many techniques that we're going to talk about in our next best practice executive webinar series, so stay tuned for that. But there are differences.
Great, and we do actually have a couple people asking when or how can they see a full demo of the Validation Master solution?
Excellent question. If you'd like to see Validation Master in a full demo to show the full work process, my email address is there, vkbailey@onshoretech.com. I would be happy to schedule a demo and show you the system live and how it works and how it does the kind of level 5 process optimization for validation and the green validation. Green validation is here, and we're using this tool in my practice now. So if you, just check me out or go to our website, and you can actually fill in a form. I'll get back to you and show you a full-blown demo.
All right, the last question that I have is the system able to generate documents in our corporate test protocol format?
Yes. This is one of the big things when you get to level 5 optimization. I've been in many life sciences companies over the past 30 years, and one thing I can tell you about them, even though they all are doing the same validation, 100% of the time the templates are different. So if I go to company A, company B, company C, every single company has different ways that they lay out their protocols, different ways that they lay out their validation master plan, test plan, and so forth. One of the things to achieve level 5 optimization is the ability to establish consistent practices. And that means we are able to take your existing documents. We're not asking you to change your document format, and we're able to put your document format in the system, so when the system spits out a test script, it looks like your test script with your logos on it, with your boilerplate, and the way you want to lay out your test scripts. So the beauty of this tool, remember I said it works the way you work? This is designed so that you don't have to change your processes internally. The software works the way you work. So yes, you can upload your own document templates into the system and get them to spit out the way you want your documents to look. So you don't get generic looking documents. You get documents with your logo on them and so forth. Great question.
All right, Valerie, that seems to be all the questions that I have in the queue. So at that time, I'll go ahead and thank you very much for coming on today and sharing with us on Green Validation, and thank everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you at a future webinar. Thanks a lot.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
And bye.
Bye-bye.